right. Welcome back to the Chase MedSearch Podcast. My guest today is Kate Willis. Kate is one of those rare leaders whose career doesn't follow a straight line, but when you step back, it makes perfect sense. She began her professional life on stage, performing 8 to 10 shows a week as Dorothy in the national tour of The Wizard of Oz. That early training in presence, storytelling, and performance would later become a competitive advantage, just not in the place you'd expect. Kate went on to build an exceptional career in medical technology, holding senior commercial leadership roles at Medtronic, Nevro, and Neurovalens. She's led large-scale market launches, built high-performing sales and marketing organizations, secured Medicare coverage and VA national contracts, and helped take complex therapies in neuromodulation, sleep medicine, and digital health from concept to real-world adaptation. What makes Kate especially interesting is the way that she bridges worlds, clinical credibility and consumer storytelling, early stage grit and enterprise scale execution, high performance, and real life as a working mom. She's also a trusted advisor to early stage companies, a board member focused on youth advocacy and access to care, and a frequent voice on leadership, women in MedTech, and storytelling in healthcare. Today, we're going to talk about building markets from scratch, how leaders earn trust in crowded healthcare spaces, and what it really takes to build a resilient, sustainable career. Kate Willis, welcome to the podcast.
Oh, thanks so much. I'm glad to be here, Jordan.
It's great to have you on. And I want to launch right into this because your career is amazing, and it's always fun to take a quick detour from medical sales and medical devices. You went from performing 8 to 10 shows a week as Dorothy in The Wizard of Oz to leading national commercialization efforts for FDA-cleared devices. What did live performance teach you about pressure, repetition, and consistency that shows up in your leadership today?
Yeah, that's a great question, Jordan. It's funny when you start talking about 8 to 10 shows a week, I immediately just get exhausted just thinking about it. I think it's something that, when you're in your 20s, you have a lot of energy. But I would say, though, it really teaches you consistency with showing up every day and a lot of discipline. And it's really translated and transformed like how I operate today. I'm somebody that's very structured, very disciplined. Fitness is a big part of my life. And for me, it's being consistent as a leader. I think about, the days that I was performing, there are certain days, believe it or not, where you really don't feel like being on stage, or you're under the weather, or you feel sick, and the audience doesn't care, and you've got to show up and perform and be your best. And I think that rings true whether you're a sales rep and you're in the OR and you've got to be there to show up for your patients, or you're a leader and your team needs you. Either way, it's really about being consistent and showing up with positivity every single day.
Yeah, I agree 1,000%. Do you think reps and leaders underestimate how much actual performance is part of selling in healthcare?
I think so. I think it's interesting because, somebody that has a theater or a dramatic background, it's not all about these big theatrics, but I do recall those days back in the neurostimulation world where, we would do this interoperative testing. And if you can think back to those days and you're in the OR and all of a sudden it's like, okay, we're going to test. And the room gets quiet. And then it's kind of like, I remember those days of being like, you're on stage, it's time to perform. And if you have bad impedances or you can't get the paresthesia where you needed it, and all eyes were on you, and in some sense, it was a performance. And so I think, every time you're showing up, you're performing, you're adding value, and there is that factor, and you've got to tell a really good, compelling, strong story. And of course, now you've got to add value. You've got to, really, really bring it to the table, because it's never been more competitive than it is today.
Yeah. I learned earlier in the warm-up that you were a theater kid. Is that right? And went to college for that?
Yes. So it's funny. Yeah, I went to school in Boston Conservatory of Music at Berkeley, and, started out dancing as a kid, really got into competitive dance 9-10 years old, and then grew into a theater career. And, I think it gives you a lot of skills that are very transferable to sales. There's no doubt about it, but yes. Feels like a lifetime ago.
That's great. Maybe that's an under-tapped resource for medical sales positions are theater kids. I hadn't thought about
I
that,
think it
but now I'm thinking
is.
about it. Yeah.
If you need something done, hire a theater kid. They've got a lot of grit and they're pretty resourceful and creative. There's no doubt.
I'll bet. At Neurovalens, you were the sole U.S. employee and built Modius Sleep Market, the Modius Sleep Market, from pre-funding, soft launch to national visibility. What's the very first thing you focused on when there was no infrastructure, no brand, and no team?
Yeah, I think anytime you're starting from a clean slate, it's really understanding your market. It's understanding what your patient is needing, what your patient demographic looks like, doing a lot of research to really understand what is going to drive your commercial strategy. So I think anytime you're in that position where you're just starting with basically nothing and have to build it from the ground up, it's really understanding your value proposition, what your patient needs, and how you solve that problem. And then, of course, you want to talk to your customers, talk to your physicians, find out what's important to them, and then bridge those gaps and figure out how you're going to solve an unmet need. What is that problem that we're trying to solve and improve patients' quality of life?
How did you decide between direct to consumer versus clinical credibility early on?
Yeah, I wouldn't say it's a question of deciding one or the other. I think there's certainly advantages and disadvantages to launching directly to the consumer versus, using a more B2B kind of business model or traditional med device. I think it's really kind of maybe which one is first, but you're always going to need clinical credibility. Physicians are always going to be part of the equation. You need their support. You need it to validate the technology, and patients want to make sure that the technology is safe, the product is safe, and that ultimately it's going to improve their lives.
What surprised you the most about selling Insomnia versus a traditional procedure-based therapy?
Yeah, I would say, just stepping into the sleep world. For me, I say this because I'm a good sleeper, knock on wood. So sleep is not something that I really spent a lot of time thinking about. And at first I almost got a little bit paranoid thinking, all right, I don't want to get so in the weeds of thinking about sleep that it's going to almost wreck my sleep or cause me not to be a great sleeper. But I think the thing about insomnia is that it's so personal and it's so debilitating to people. I met a patient who hadn't slept in 13 nights.
Oof.
I think, at one point he held some sort of world record for being up most consecutive nights. And just how vital sleep is to you, as from your own health, your mental well-being. It's just such an important part of your life. And when we're not sleeping, it just impacts so much. And for me, it's just insomnia is so personal. And, I think a lot of times we take sleep for granted, or at least people that sleep well, like myself.
Mm-hmm. You partnered with ResMed, the National Sleep Foundation, the NFL Players Association, and you even brought in Howie Mandel as an ambassador. How do you decide which partnerships actually build trust versus just create noise in that space?
Yeah, I think it's interesting because you really kind of have to take a step back and understand what your brand stands for, what you believe in as a company, what your mission is, and then making sure that whether it's a single person, whether it's an organization or a society, do they align with your core values? And then really understanding, is this something that's going to add credibility to what we're doing or potentially distract? And so for me, it's always about making sure that those partnerships align with our mission and what we're trying to do to improve people's well-being.
You secured a VA national contract for Modius Sleep Therapy effective January 2025. What do most commercial leaders misunderstand about selling into the VA system?
Yeah, I would think, I had a great learning experience while I was at Nevro, really understanding, kind of the insides of the VA and how they like to do business. And I would say they are not like your traditional enterprise partner. They're massive. Obviously, they serve a ton of veterans and they do great work. I think it's just really understanding how they like to do business, which is a little bit different than what you see out on the commercial side. So once you can kind of understand how they like to partner and how they like to interact with industry, then it makes things a lot smoother. There's so many veterans that need help no matter what the space is. And I think there's great people within the organization from a national perspective, from the local centers, and it's really just finding those right champions because they will be a great partner to you. I know that a lot of times there's a reputation for it being really slow, but I think they're deliberate in what they do. And once you can kind of speak their language, then the doors kind of open up and you can really, help a lot of patients that are in need.
What's a key difference between selling commercially versus selling into the VA? One that just pops into your mind immediately.
Well, I mean, I always think about this now from a reimbursement perspective. They don't follow the payment structure or reimbursement that Medicare does. I mean, they use the same codes, but I would just say, we have a saying that if you've been to one VA, you've been to one VA. So even though you can get a national contract, it doesn't mean it's like green light across the board, because each individual VA will operate kind of independently. So Cincinnati, where I'm based, may do it one way, and then you go to Houston and it's a whole nother animal. So I think you can get a national contract, but again, you're going to have to build those champions kind of from the ground up, because each one, can do their own thing.
At Nevro, you helped secure 100% Medicare coverage for painful diabetic neuropathy and non-surgical back pain. You increased your authorization approvals by over 70%. What changed? Process, messaging, mindset?
Yeah, I would say all of the above. I think, again, diabetic neuropathy was a new indication for us. It was really moving spinal cord stimulation forward. Nevro was the first one to get that indication, and then the other ones followed. I think it was a combination of things, and a part of my career that I really enjoyed, because it involved getting lawmakers on board. Mm-hmm. And so the biggest challenge was that we had a couple LCDs that were just holdouts, and we could not get the coverage policy updated. And so we really had to be creative in our approach. And part of it was, of course, building physician champions, because you need their voice. You need them to, speak on behalf as to why it's important that patients have access to the technology and the therapy. But then, having the opportunity to go up on Capitol Hill and meet with lawmakers and say, look, this is a big problem in your area. Your constituents need access to this. There's limited options for them. And then getting them on board to put pressure on CMS and have them, take a look at these policies and make changes. So I think, that's definitely a highlight of my career was getting that opportunity to go to DC.
Yeah, let's dive into that just a little bit, because that is such a unique experience. I remember seeing a picture of you and your team on LinkedIn.
That's right, yes.
Headed to Capitol Hill or on the Capitol steps.
Yeah.
I think that just had to be something you didn't plan that you'd ever be doing in your career. What was that like?
Yeah, I guess, Katie, musical theater Katie probably didn't think that she'd be on Capitol Hill lobbying on behalf of a medical device company. Again, what was really interesting was because we went around and we got to meet in their different offices and walked around Capitol Hill and had meetings. And, and I remember being in one lawmaker's office, and everyone was kind of just crowded around me. And I'm telling the story of how this technology impacted people's lives, and gave some really specific stories, and they were really leaned in. And I think, they really just want to help. They want to listen. I think there's a lot of lawmakers that they really do care. There's a lot of noise in the media, and you go in the rotunda and you see them, interacting with the news and, creating all of this drama and all of that. But at the end of the day, they're there because they want to help. They want to listen. They want to hear what you have to say. And it was just a really, really cool, unique experience. And I got to work. We had a great team, Sandeep Patel, Carla Monticelli. We were just, three of us just really, marched along together and did some great work at Nevro. And, I loved working with those two.
Yeah, Kate goes to Washington.
Kate goes to Washington. That's right.
That's impressive. Maybe a run for office in the future?
I don't know. My dad was in politics, so maybe it's in my blood. We'll see.
We'll see. Yeah, we'll keep an eye on that. You've been Rookie of the Year, President's Club, a regional sales director, and eventually VP of commercialization. What did you have to unlearn as you moved from rep to enterprise leader?
Yeah, I think that's a really interesting question. I think anytime you go from feeling like you can do it all alone, or do it, you're kind of this hero that's going to go out and trailblaze and build things, which of course I feel like I've done throughout my career. But again, I didn't get Rep of the Year on my own. It was, through help of others and support and cross-functional, bridges that were built at Nevro. So, you just can't go alone. You need other people to support you. And I think that's one of those things where a lot of reps kind of get in this tunnel zone, or the ones that are kind of like the lone wolf that kind of, they'll find a way to get it done, but they're going to just bulldoze the heck out of the landscape, out of the, wherever they need to get, they're going to just drive. And I have a lot of respect for that. But I think long term, if you want to really build a broad career that's going to allow you to kind of move and go in different directions, I think you're going to have to figure out a way to bring people along. And so I think that's one of those things is, instead of thinking about just solo and my own contributions, it's, how do you bring people along and how do you work together, whether it's just in sales or, cross-functionally, I think is absolutely critical.
What do you think is the hardest transition point for a really high-performing rep who wants to lead?
Yeah, that can be tricky. And I was there. I remember very clearly when I first got promoted to regional sales director from being a rep. And I think for me, and I had a mentor tell me this, your primary customer has to shift. So you have to shift from thinking the physician's my customer to now the rep is my customer. And now my key customer is, how do I help the reps? How do I help the reps get where they want to be, mentor them, and then also eliminate any obstacles that the company or physicians or whomever is throwing in their way? So it's really becomes, how do I help them? Of course, I have the physicians that are kind of, the secondary customer, but I think you have to make that switch mentally to say, the physicians aren't coming to Kate first line anymore. It's the reps are coming to me. How do I help them first, physicians second? And you've got to make that switch, and it's got to happen, mentally to be successful.
Yeah, that's a very hard thing to do, I think, for any really strong individual contributor. I've had to find that way in my own business too, is releasing control to others and empowering them.
Yeah, you can't be the super rep. I mean, those days, you can't just be the manager / super rep, because you burn out. It's not really sustainable. And it's also not fair to the team either.
Correct. You helped redesign a sales compensation plan at Nevro. What's the most common mistake companies make when they think compensation alone will retain top talent?
Yeah, I think that it's a tricky one, because you think, all right, well, you're in sales, so everyone just cares about making the maximum amount of money. And of course, there are people like that, and everybody wants to earn well and earn a good living and maximize their compensation. But I saw so much frustration throughout my career from reps that just felt like they weren't heard. They wanted a bigger seat at the table, or even a toe at the table. And so I think the frustration comes from, you could be making a lot of money, and of course that certainly helps. But if you don't feel valued, if you don't feel like your voice is heard, if there's a disconnect between sales and marketing or the leadership team, I think that just really drives a wedge. And it doesn't really matter how much compensation you're getting. If you don't feel valued, I think you're going to end up with potential, retention issues and people wanting to look elsewhere. Yeah.
When a rep goes over on their commissions and then the company holds it for an entire year, do you think that helps retain employees, or does that employees looking?
I've never experienced that. That just gave me some heartburn just thinking about that.
Believe it or not, there are companies that do it. So
wow, that just doesn't seem right to me. I can't imagine that, but I guess I don't know. I guess I've been out of that.
Yeah. We'll have to see how it plays out. So anyway,
right.
that was never part of your compensation plan design, I don't think.
No. That sounds like it's like holding a little bit of money hostage. I don't know how that does.
Yeah. Well, anyway, we'll leave that there.
Yeah.
What actually keeps high performers engaged when the market gets really competitive, do you think?
Yeah, I think, obviously the leader, the manager, the direct manager, I think has an obligation and a responsibility, of course, to keep people engaged, to understand, there's always ups and downs in a market. There's ups and downs in a territory, in a region. There's things that are going to be absolutely outside of your control that happen in your territory. And, there's nothing that you can do about it. But I think if you really understand what motivates a rep and you're seeing what their career progression looks like long-term, and you understand what their goals are. And I think there's ways to engage people when they kind of feel down and out through other projects. For me, I worked cross-functionally on a number of different projects. Even when I was a sales rep or regional sales director, I was working close with, the reimbursement team or marketing and part of different pilot things. So it kind of made my next role where I went into commercial projects, a pretty smooth transition because I'd already built a lot of those relationships. And so I think for anybody that's looking to do more, or they feel like they're a little, frustrated with maybe what's happening in their own territory, think outside. It's really easy to get very tunnel visioned in your own little geography, in your own world, but I'm sure there's other opportunities within the organization, or reach out to others that are cross-functional, because if you're internal, and you're in the marketing team or market access, there's no better resource than the sales team who work directly with customers to learn. So they're always looking for more insights and to build those relationships. So reach out and build it, because, it only adds value to them as well.
Wise words. You founded the Women in Leadership ERG at Nevro. What structural barriers, in your experience, not personal ones, but maybe observationally, or even if you've experienced them, still quietly limit women's advancement in MedTech?
Yeah, this is an interesting one. Well, first off, I have to also give credit to Karen Carr Fraser, because she and I started it together. I remember after the rep of the year, and I gave a speech, and it took a little turn about some sexual harassment experience I had earlier in my career, became part of the speech. And I found myself after that speech in the bathroom surrounded by about 30 women, all, bombarding me with their sexual harassment stories and all kinds of crazy stuff. So it was a wild night. And I think that was kind of where the ERG was born, was we needed to have a place for women to come together and feel strong and promote leadership and support women in the workplace. And that's where it kind of evolved from. I would say, I still think, unfortunately, there's a bit of the boys club. It does exist. I think there's new resources, though, that kind of counteract that. I would say, for example, the Chief networking group, which I'm a part of. I'm a member of Chief, and it's for executive women. It's very curated, amazing resources. And I have to say, I've had so many incredible women support me, and they've had in-person events this last year. And I've never gone to an event before where you felt just the energy. And there was, traditionally a lot of women can be, dare I say, catty or maybe not supportive of one another, but to go into a room of 300 other females and just feel like entirely safe and supported, it was a completely new experience. So I would say, I think there's more and more of these Chief groups that are completely legitimate, and the people that are members really believe it. They're there for the right reasons. So highly recommend, joining one of those types of groups or Chief if it's something that is interesting. But yeah, I started my career in orthopedics. It kind of doesn't get more boys club than that, but we're getting there. I think we're making some headway.
That's good.
That's late. We're moving the needle.
What do you think well-intentioned leaders still get wrong in this area?
I think even well-intentioned leaders make assumptions sometimes. There's just a bias, and I think sometimes they make assumptions about people's personal lives or their goals or what they're interested in. I'll never forget, I had a rep say, yeah, my boss said, I didn't consider you for this promotion because I know you have X, Y, and Z at home, or I know that you like to do this as a hobby. So why would I ask you to, be a regional sales manager? And so I think those bias still exist. And I think it's just, being vocal and being transparent about what your goals are. I never hesitated by saying, this is what my goal is. This is where I want to be. This is where I want to be in 2 years and 1 year. And share it with people within the organization so they are very clear with where you want to be.
Great. You've led campaigns across Meta, Google, influencer marketing, high profile events while maintaining clinical credibility. What's the line, in your opinion, healthcare companies should never cross, even if the ROI looks great?
Yes. There's obviously, you can't be promoting anything off label. You need to make sure that patients are first and that you're promoting patient safety. I know there's been some companies where they've employed, I think, influencers and patient advocates and things like that. You need to be careful with messages that are getting put out there because, you don't want to blur the lines. The FDA is very clear about what is considered off-label promotion and things that need to be very transparent about it being an ad or there being an influencer involved in some sort of campaign and just being very transparent about it. It's the world that we live in now, and everyone, I think, is fine with it. People understand the role of a patient advocate or an influencer or, working in social media worlds, it's fine. But as long as you're transparent about it and you disclose it, and certainly just as long as you're putting patient first and patient experiences and, being honest, I think you'll be fine, but you've got to be transparent about what you're doing.
So,
Yeah.
anyway, you serve on boards focused on youth advocacy and access to care. How does that work shape the way you think about commercialization and responsibility?
Yeah, I mean, for me, I didn't necessarily set out to be on these boards. It kind of just worked out that they both ended up focused on children and youth. So the one is it's Lighthouse Youth and Services Foundation, and it's for young people that are homeless or young people that are going through transitions and things like that. And then the other one is Children's Law Center. And that's an interesting experience because I think I'm the only non-lawyer on the board. So it's great because it gives me new experiences. Just to be the only one that's not an attorney. And I learn a lot on those boards, aside from just, giving back and feeling connected to my community, which is really important to me. It gives you different perspective. It gives you a different appreciation for what people are going through and for challenges that they're facing every day. And I just think about, how we can do better when it comes to taking care of our young people. And that obviously translates to mental health, to healthcare. How we're taking care of our children is extremely important, and it's our future. So, I think I've learned a lot. I think they've learned a lot from me because I'll put my marketing hat on with Children's Law Center and worked with them on a social media campaign and things like that. So I think it's great to be able to learn from each other. And I've got 10 attorneys I can call anytime and get advice, which is also handy. But yeah, I think it just gives you a broader perspective and to work with people that are outside of your field. I think with Lighthouse, nobody else is in the healthcare, so it just broadens your experience and just makes you a more well-rounded leader, really.
That's excellent. When you do great work, good things come to you, and you get asked to do more good work in other areas and expand. So you've been doing
Yes.
that. Yeah.
Yes. Expansion is good. That's right.
Yeah. Well, maybe just to close out our time here, you've built a career across performance, sales leadership, and board service. If your daughter was describing what you do for a living someday, what would you hope she says?
I would hope that she says that I help people. I help people feel better in their lives, improve their lives. That's a really interesting question. She'd probably also say that, I make videos because she sees me doing my content creator. But, I think the kids have been really involved in my career in some way or another throughout the years. So they've always really had a good understanding of what I was doing and how I was trying to help people and, improve patient lives. So I would hope that she would say, and then they would both say that, mom tries to make people's lives better. And that's, I think, what we're all trying to do in healthcare, ultimately.
Do they want to go into healthcare?
I don't know. I don't think so.
Okay.
I don't think so. I don't think either one will end up there. But hey,
Maybe
you never
theater.
know.
Theater can lead to healthcare. You never know.
I know it is a stepping stone, for a career in healthcare, apparently.
That's great. Kate, thank you so much for being on today.
Of course.
It was a lot of fun, and I really appreciate you sharing your experiences. I know a ton of people will benefit. How can they reach you if they have follow-up questions, if they want to engage you for consulting gigs or anything like that? What's the best way?
Yeah, absolutely. You can find me on LinkedIn, Kate Willis. And then also I'm happy to share my email address if you'd like to reach out. I'd be happy to help however I can.
Great. Thanks for being on.